Welcome to the Grape Escape Live at Enotria&Co. Before I invite Ken on to join us, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about kind of how it works and what we're trying to do here. So my name is, Harriet. I'm the Director of Buying and Brand Management at Enotria&Co, and I have the honour and privilege of hosting a series of live tastings every Thursday here at our Instagram. So I'm going to invite Ken on in a second, but I'm going to introduce him quickly. He's an absolute legend. He was a restaurateur, and in 1993 he bought a derelict farm on a whim and followed his passion of winemaking. And pretty much from the beginning, he became one of the biggest voices in South Africa. He's a great raconteur. He's larger than life, and most importantly, he makes delicious wine. So Ken, if you're there, please come on. I'm going to invite you because I've waffled too much already. So I'm going to hand over to you, Ken, now to take us through two wines. I think everyone else, if you just keep the questions coming, I'll try and write down a few and we'll come to those afterwards. But over to you, Ken, starting with the Old Vine Chenin Blanc.
The Old Vine Chenin Reserve. The Old Vine Chenin, now that Old Vine vineyard, we started off, that Old Vine vineyard was right in front of the tasting room. And then we had another vineyard lower down on the property, down near the little perennial stream. And so we've got two vineyards which are both well over 35 years old. And hence we coined the name Old Vines before the Old Vine Association was formed. And when they started asking about, well, how old is Old Vine? I said, well, there's no rules, there's no laws, but I think 35 is a fair knock for a vineyard. When you assume that very few vineyards get to 50, 35's Old Vines, that's already a good senior knock. And so looking at older vines, they do give you better concentration. They do give you less fruit, less yield, but more intensity. And I think an altogether more silky, creamier wine that you're getting out of it. So that Old Vine Reserve, I mean, it's old vineyards. We harvest all of our vineyards by hand. The three really important factors. Number one is that means we employ an extra 30 or 40 people during harvest. You can use machines. The machines are fantastic. They're very clever. They can sort the grapes, but they can't sort the way I sort or the way our people's hands sort, because we pick all the fruit just on the west side of the vineyard. And we leave the fruit on the east side, the cool morning sunrise. For us, cool morning sunrise is east, opposite to you in the northern hemisphere. You'll have the long afternoon eastern sun. We get the short morning sun from the east, and then the long afternoon western sun here. So that long afternoon western sun for us really is what gives us a completely different flavor to the other side. And we harvest by hand. We select that fruit and we make the wine in two parts, about 10 days or 2 weeks apart. We make two different wines from the same vineyard. And for us, making that wine is the first harvest. The first batch would be barrel fermented, tank fermented, stainless steel tanks, native yeast. And the second batch is barrel fermented in French oak, about 20%, not a lot of new oak, just about 20% new oak. And the idea is to let that ferment and let it get into a nice soft richness in the barrel. And then after about 9 or 10 months to look at these two halves and then to balance the wine, and whether that balance is at 40-60 or 60-40 or 50-50, it's always a selection. It's each year is an experimentation. So it's never a recipe. I say to people quite frequently, we're not in the cookie making business. There's no recipe. You've got to taste it and feel it and find the purity in the wine, the balance, the point where that wine sits on its absolute balance is so critical. So for us, making that wine each year is a discovery, and making that Old Vine Reserve, you know, I think that is just the most beautiful kind of easy wine to get to. If you think that retails at around about 13 pounds or something, and that wine we've just released from the vineyard last year. We released the 2007 Old Vine Reserve just to show how beautifully this wine ages. And we always have library stocks, perhaps a pallet or so, that we re-release maybe 8 or 9 or 10 years later, just to show that this very plain, simple, ordinary wine, if you lay it down for 10 years in your cellar at home, will reward you immensely, so much so you'll wish you'd bought 2 cases. You know, it really is that the kind of wine that you want to lay down, and it rewards so beautifully. It's a great food wine. It works beautifully with shrimp, with seafood, with shellfish.
It's really delicious. It's been one of my kind of staple home fridge favorites for a long time. And it's got that amazing kind of, it's got that real citrus, linear structure to it. But then there's this wonderful mouthfeel and texture. And it's almost a slightly mineral, fresh, but then you get this lovely oatmeal-y kind of oak to it. But it's really, really subtle, and the fruit really comes through. And I've always kind of almost likened it slightly to a sort of Premier Cru Chablis in that, you know, in that sort of complexity, but freshness. But for the price, it's amazing.
Well, thank you. It's a huge compliment. And that wine, from year to year, as we launch the new release, we often get a comment saying, oh, it's much, much tighter than last year. It is. It always is. Because in 1 year, that wine releases. And unless we start it out, really, as you say, as like a Chablis, where it's completely restrained, the wine becomes flabby very soon down the road. And if we start it really, really tight, it releases within about a year in bottle. And if you talk to the producers in the Loire Valley, they will tell you that Chenin Blanc sleeps for the first year in the bottle. It sleeps. They just say it's asleep. And it is literally the first year that Chenin Blanc is in the bottle. I wince. We should just leave it there. Don't drink it. Wait until it's been in bottle for a year, then open it and look at that evolution. It really is a beautiful, beautiful wine. And it just continues to age, get better.
We've had a question from someone, I'm sorry I didn't get the name, but they've asked, how long can you lay it down for?
You know, I very happily say for 10 years. I think you might be able to lay it down for longer. But frankly, if you lay it down for 10 years and you drink it and it gives you immense pleasure, what more do you want? Why test the boundary when you can get amazing freshness, ageability, richness? And that age, laying it down, what happens is you get a complexity, a secondary fruit character, where you go from bright green apples to baked apples. There's a kind of caramelization almost of the apple texture, where if you imagine you walked into a kitchen where an apple pie was baking, you're getting the scent of that slightly caramelized apple pie baking. And that's really what happens with the age. Oxygen is this wonderful, wonderful thing. I say to people, oxygen is the perfect yin-yang and of all of us, of life. When you think that oxygen is what we need to live, and every breath we take takes us one step closer to that final breath. And oxygen in wine is much the same. It gives the wine life, and it takes life from the wine. But it's the fact that oxygen gives the wine life. I love giving the wines oxygen early during fermentation. A lot of people work very reductively.
Yeah.
They make very tight, very ballerina type wines. Could you imagine me creating a ballerina type wine? It's just not going to happen. I don't know.
No one wants you to make a ballerina wine, Ken.
I just don't know how to do that. That's just not on my den. I don't know how to do that.
Why don't we move on to the next wine that we're going to taste with you, which is the Renegade.
Renegade in name, Renegade in nature. And, you know, the idea with Renegade was to make a wine, a blend of Rhone varieties. And here where we are in the Cape, you say, why Rhone varieties? This climate where we are, 5 kilometers from the ocean, this climate is deemed a Mediterranean climate. We have long, dry summers, cool, wet winters. And if you look at what grows here, if you look at the fynbos, it's just like the garrigue in the south of France. If you have a look at the pine trees, the stone pines, and if you have a look at the cypress trees, you could wake up here one morning, and if somebody's just shipped you here overnight and you asked you where you were, you might be in south of Italy, south of France, and you're in Stellenbosch. And the climate's the same, and the grapes, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, and now more recently, Marsanne, Roussanne, Viognier, you're starting to see all of these grapes popping up more and more out of South Africa and doing a good job with them because this climate is so eminently suitable to those Rhone varieties. And so Renegade was an early adopter, if you like. 1996, I had a little old Syrah block on the property, virused, completely leaf roll virused, a small block bush vine Syrah, and I was desperate to find some Grenache to blend it with. And I'd heard that there was a Grenache vineyard in Stellenbosch. And I went to the enfant terrible of the South African wine industry. Nothing other than Andre van Rensburg from Vergelegen. But in those days, he was still at Stellenzucht, and he was making the famous Stellenzucht Syrah, and he was the most vociferous, and he had a way with words that if people published them, they generally got into trouble, or he did. I mean, Andre was the enfant terrible for good reason. And when I went to go visit him and say, I've heard that you've got some Grenache, he absolutely lambasted me. Grenache, that rubbish, that absolute, you can have it. Whatever you want, take it away. Get it out of my cellar. I don't want to know it. Don't tell anybody you got it from me. He was so bad. That stuff doesn't have any color. It's got no body. It's got no extract. And I go, yeah, that's Grenache. That's perfect. Where is it? And he said, you can take the vineyard. And so I went to the vineyard owner and rented the vineyard. The vineyard at that stage was already 50 years old. It was 4 hectares. It was the very last Grenache vineyard in Stellenbosch in 1995. And nobody in South Africa was talking about Grenache. There was nobody bottling Grenache at that time. Nobody. Remarkably. And I was so proud of it that I made sure it was more than 50% of the blend with my Syrah. And I called the wine Grenache Syrah. It failed spectacularly because nobody knew what Grenache was. So we just collected vintages for about 4 years. And eventually I said, you know what? Let's blend some Mourvèdre, because I planted the first Mourvèdre vineyard in Stellenbosch. I was the pioneer for Mourvèdre. Planted the first Mourvèdre vineyard. And once I started blending Mourvèdre into it, I said, okay, this thing is now without rules at all. It's a Renegade. Let's call it Renegade and take it to the market as Renegade. And finally it found its place, because people were just scared of the word Grenache. They couldn't say Grenache. They just weren't familiar with Grenache. There was so little Grenache in South Africa. Way back in 1990, there was a total of 64 hectares of Grenache in 118,000 hectares of vineyard. 64 Grenache out of 118,000.
Wow.
It was a drop in the ocean.
It's one of the real kind of trendy grapes at the moment in South Africa, isn't it? Everyone's talking about it.
Lots of Grenache, lots of Cinsault. Cinsault's picking up. Lots of people doing Cinsault. And Grenache for me has just always been so exciting. You know, the French call it the Pinot de la Sud. And you know, when I hear stories, I have no idea of the veracity, but just how much Grenache could help Burgundy in a weaker vintage, that the tankers from the south of France would go up to Beaune, up to the kind of Burgundy vineyards and come back empty the next day, and just help the Burgundies on a little bit. And you can see exactly how Grenache has that red fruited character of Pinot, that it has that wonderful elegance.
How would you just say, there's a lot of people loving the wine, there's lots of comments coming through, and how would you sort of talk through the sort of flavours you get, the 16? Tell us, you know, how you describe the taste of the wine.
For me, the Renegade is always a kind of philosophical wine. If you imagine a pyramid pitched upside down on its tip, on its point, and the base of the pyramid that you encounter first, when you smell this wine, you get the whole base of the pyramid. And here you've got this layer of red fruit, of strawberries, of pomegranate, and perhaps even some mulberry, a hint of mulberry, cherries. And then down below that, there's a spiciness. And that spice is the Syrah. And there's nutmeg and cinnamon and black pepper and a hint of white pepper, not a lot of white pepper.
And there's sort of like a black olive. Like there's a real kind
there's
of...
that kind of extract. And then below that, you've got this meaty bass tone, this heavy bass, almost just a bass through the wine. And you've got this pyramid of fruit, spice, weight. And you've got this beautiful kind of triangle, this upside down pyramid. And for me, every year making the wine is to see that shape and to fill that shape with the different, and the blend is never the same. People say, how much Syrah? They get quite perturbed. How much Syrah? I really don't know.
I've got a question here for you, Ken. So what would you pair? Someone's junior, or someone has just asked what you would pair with this wine.
oh, that one needs something with a little bit of fat, maybe some duck. Lovely if you did a cassoulet would be a perfect dish for that, or some duck. Even if you just did a duck breast, or if you did some lamb, if you had some nice fatty lamb, this wine's got enough acid in it to actually get through that fat, and the fruit quality is so much. You know, the oak on the wine is all old wood. There's no new oak. You know, and there's no vanilla, there's none of those oak flavors, it's fruit flavors.
Would you chill it down slightly, just ever so slightly in the hot temperatures?
You might, you know, I think 18 degrees Celsius, 18 to 20 degrees, something like that would be perfect. If you had that at 16 or 18 degrees, you'd be fine, absolutely fine.
Going to wrap up now. So I think just a real big thank you from me, on behalf of Enotria&Co and Great Western Wine. Thank you very much. I hope you come again next week. As I said earlier, we've got 4 more of these scheduled at the same time. All the cases are now ready to be ordered, so you can go and buy them already. It's Grape Escapes at Great Western Wine. Next week, we will be inviting Alessio Panetta from the iconic Sicilian winery, Panetta Winery. He's a really, really talented, passionate man. He makes kick-ass wine, in particular an extraordinary Chardonnay, which will blow your mind.
Great wine.
There you go. So thank you, Ken, and have a very happy bank holiday, everyone. Cheers.